It's time. It's time. It's hater time. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, happy Nintendo Switch Week. It's great to see each and every one of you right here on the Hate Bit Podcast. Without wasting any time, we're going to get right into our program because we know we're running late, but you know what? Fuck you. Joining me, Midget Wrestling's answer to Andre the Giant, Alpha Omega Sin.
Since we were talking about Vader, I assure you none of us are actually going to lose our eye in this. But if it does happen, we'll wear a blue blazer mask and we'll keep it in there.
Fantastic. And also, the prettiest shade of monochrome, Mr. Razor Fist.
Yeah. Well, in keeping with the Vader theme, I promise I won't cut a lame Attitude Era promo about how I'm a fat piece of shit. I promise, ladies and gentlemen. That's Jim Sterling's job. Continue.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. I want to remind each and every one of you to check us out on the social media, on the Twitter, on the Facebook, on the Instagram, on all that sort of things. That way you can see the paint, the colors that I paint my toes, and you can see Alpha Omega Sin from way back in the 90s, all that sort of thing. So be sure and check it out. Also check us out right here on the YouTube because we're here for your convenience. And if you weren't here, things would be a lot better, trust me. But the point is, I want to remind each and every one of you that we're great and, you have nothing else to do on a Monday night. Without any further ado, I want to bring up something that's just tearing me apart right now. The cancellation of Scalebound. I have not yet purchased an Xbox One. And about 1,000 people in three-part harmony say, good for you! And I recognize that I was waiting for one piece of software. One goddamn piece of software was going to come out and it was going to make the whole thing worth it when it was like $100 or whatever. But the point is, I was waiting for Scalebound. And then Microsoft, Razor, tell them what Microsoft did.
They shit-canned the game. There's a little bit more of a story here. I'm actually reading an article from last year, from January of last year. I had forgotten about this, that it was supposed to come out last year, and it was delayed to 2017, which should have been the first sign that all was not well. The thing that kind of cued me off that something was up was when... Did we ever establish what the hell that game was? We were talking about this before we went on air, but there's a game that was advertised on the PS4 at E3 last year that basically completely ripped off Scalebound, but with robots.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to figure it out now while you're talking.
Yeah, it's just this techno broad running around in this inordinately verdant world with giant Shadow of the Colossus robots running around, and it's basically just Scalebound with
Horizon Zero Dawn.
There you go, Horizon Zero Dawn. When you have games that are ripping you off and they're about to come out first, you know something's up with your development, and that's essentially what happened to Scalebound right here. So
it's, and it's more fucked up because you had brought up the whole thing of the delays are going to be a trigger warning that all might not be well. The problem is that throughout all of 2016, we had so many games that were delayed. Yeah, you wouldn't fucking notice. So that's something that was easy to look over. And to be honest, we had plenty to play and keep ourselves preoccupied with, so we didn't really think anything of it. And this was one of the best fucking exclusives that they had coming out, in my opinion. I mean, I'm still excited for Cuphead, but they came around, they were like, well, hey, don't worry, you can get Halo Wars 2 still. Yeah, I can't wait to not play that.
All aboard the bandwagon, folks.
That kind of shit. It's not to say that, they're lacking in first party and shit. It's just that Microsoft is so fucking notorious at mishandling their first party. Yeah. And this is just one of those fucking examples.
It's not technically in it Platinum. It's not technically first party. It's just
it's exclusive and shit. That's all that I mean by that is when Microsoft gets to be like, hell, hey, this is our shit right here, and Platinum gets hoarded around virtually everywhere because nobody has picked them up exclusive. I still can't figure that out, by the way. Why nobody has just decided we will own Platinum games because everything that they make is fucking badass shit.
The same reason you don't marry a whore. It's been over there. It's been, you don't really want it in your portfolio.
Sometimes you can go and convert the whore into a housewife. It's not always successful because the mailman doesn't come around, but you know.
You're not Richard Gere and she's not Julia Roberts. It's platinum, folks. They made the last Ninja Turtles game. Did you play that festering turd? Jesus Christ!
Look, my biggest.
Wait a minute. Wait, if you're gonna shit on Platinum for doing great games and shit games, then let's stop singing all the praises of Way Forward while we're at it.
Hold on. I had in keeping with our '90s talk earlier. I need to call it what all my friends did in the '90s. Ninja Turtles. Thank you very much.
Turtles.
Ninja Turtles.
Did you hang out in Oklahoma during those formative years?
Apparently. I was hanging out in a one-horse town in Texas.
playing high school football on a Friday night.
It does make me kind of curious if Platinum, since they've got all the assets, if they'll end up trying to take what they have and then repurpose it into like their own IP and then ship that out to people, because that shit happens all the time.
Well, Platinum has, correct me if I'm wrong, but Platinum has kind of a weird development process, don't they? Like they have most studios, like big studios, will have like an A and a B team. They got like A, B, C, and D teams. They're all working on like third-party projects all at once. They've got tendrils in every single hentai hole.
I would not be surprised if they have a whole department dedicated to games that are most likely going to be canceled. We call this the coffee break room.
I mean, I feel kind of bad for Platinum in a way, because they're at least doing shit that's like, I like over the top and ridiculous because it's a fucking video game, so please give that to me. And they're all about that shit. The downside to it is a lot of their games are, in truth, niche. And they like it sucks in that regard, because it's like, man, that's really fucking badass experience, but we can't get a fucking publisher to fund this shit. I mean, when you have something like Bayonetta 2, which that shit did super well, well, Bayonetta 1 did super well, but they couldn't get anybody to publish Bayonetta 2.
No,
And Nintendo came along and actually fucking saved the day on that, despite the fact that the game came out to tons of acclaim and praise and everything that you would expect. It's just odd to think that nobody was willing to go and give that a fucking chance, especially with a lot of the sour bullshit that ends up making its way on the store shelves, but you weren't willing to go on that.
Yeah.
Well, let's be perfectly fair if we're going to be honest about things, and I, being a big fan of Platinum Games, for those who have been paying attention, they have great games that look great, they sound great, they feel great, but a lot of them will give you fucking arthritis and tendonitis throughout all the complex movements and touching of screens and things and pushing the thing backward and all that stuff. You know, their games require a certain audience. People who have, I don't know, temperate weather and
eyeballs.
Dude, okay, name a single shoot 'em up from back in like the 80s and 90s didn't go and give you fucking carpal tunnel. Like every single one of those games, you were fucked. Like here going up was just a fucking mangled mess.
Oh, not only that, but like, goddamn, Mario Party.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, as soon as you get like the Jesus holes through your fucking hands of just trying to get the analog stick to go, and then all of a sudden everybody wonders why half the fucking Nintendo 64 analog sticks are like flaccid fucking dicks and they can't even fucking stay up on their own. Yeah, blame Mario Party. Trust me, it's no other game out there. It's that series.
Stigmata Party 7.
Can you imagine that? Like all the kids going to school with like the marks on her hands. The teacher's hyper fucking religious, but doesn't realize, and she's just like,
you're anointing your fucking what were those controllers called? It's a shark controller, shark design, something like that. Or fucking anointing your controllers with oil and shit. But yeah, what the fuck were those things called? They were like, I forget the exact name of them. It was something shark controller or something like that. But yeah.
Are you thinking
I don't
of
know
the
who
game-
cooked up that design, by the way, but Jesus Christ, it worked though. It did.
I still can't get over the fucking 3 handles. It's 2017 and I'm still going, why the fuck did they do that?
Yeah, what was going on? But you know what? It worked. It worked.
I mean, it worked. It was, dude. I've handed the fucking controller to my nephews and my son on a number of occasions, and was like, "I'll play this game," and they looked at it like every time they look at it like this. What, like, I know that they want to say, "What the fuck is this?" I know, I can see it, like I can see it on their face, but they're just like, "No, I'll get my ass beat." But there's like, what the fucking, like, who? What is this? The controller that gets thrown over the hillside in 300? Like, what the fuck happened?
After so many years of controllers all being the same, like anything different would confound them, but then you give them this tri-tentacled ham beast and just hand it to them.
Like, you know, God damn it, I just fucking. This is the perfect segue moment. Wouldn't you agree, Yo Chaos?
What, to segue and talk about how it's our 64th episode, and god damn it, here comes our discussion on the number 64, brought to you by the Nintendo 64, for all your 64 needs.
Okay, so we could.
This was going to be a discussion about canceled games. Maybe we'll go back to it. Maybe we won't. If you're not happy with that,
we can still do that. We can always end it by talking about canceled shit that didn't happen for the 64, because there are some good ones. And then it'll work. It'll work.
Okay, well then, do it to it.
Okay. Well, we got the Nintendo.
I'm calling
64.
your fucking bluff, is what I'm doing.
All right. How about this? Since we're gonna fucking call bluffs, you were the fucking smartass who brought up the Commodore 64. Who the fuck played a Commodore 64? I know fuckers in the comments are like, "Oh, I did." Shut the fuck up. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You just knew the fucking thing existed. You heard from a fucking friend of a friend. Didn't a single motherfucker have that? Like, you had Atari, Nintendo, or Sega, and that was it. And Windows 3.1.
Well, my most experience with the Commodore 64 is it's the most popular computer keyboard prop of any 80s movie you've ever seen.
Well, Commodore 64 is, outside of subpar dental hygiene, is the single greatest signifier that you may be British. It is. It really is. If you have any memories about the Commodore 64, it's
hold on. If you have any memories of the Commodore 64 or the ZX Spectrum, not the ZX Spectrum, the ZX Spectrum, then you know exactly what part of town you're in. And then we've got the Atari Jaguar. Come on, I'm pandering. Look, the Atari Jaguar, you do the math. So if you do the math, then you'd know that it's 64 bits, but you knew deep down inside that it was a shitty 16-bit machine, and that was really it. I mean, when the 32X version of Doom is technically superior to your version, there's a fucking problem. It's just a slight fucking problem.
Where did you learn how to program?
the whole fucking system, like, its highlight games are subpar.
Yeah.
Like that's its legacy. It's like, hey, remember that system that sucked real bad and that's how we went out? Yeah.
It was a problem. That was a classic case of, okay, so like the Dreamcast was on the bleeding edge of the technology of that generation, right? They were like, yeah, we're gonna have internet, but it's gonna be dial-up. You know what I mean? Like it was not quite there yet. Bleeding edge. Fucking Atari Jaguar was like the bleeding to death edge. Like there was no, they were 64-bit, but it was like only if you contorted into a wild, crazy position, only if you like overclocked 9 different CPUs on the machine, maybe you could get it to kind of roughly approximate half of a 64-bit system.
Well, and which, if you really look at it, if you know anything about how those cores and things like that work, it was very powerful, almost as if someone said, yes, I need more chips. Just how many chips do you have in there? Think, but 34 chips. Put a chip there and a chip there and a wire there and a jumper there and a capacitor there. And before you know it, Atari goodness. And from what I understand, it is quite powerful if you need it to sort tax documents. It can do that real quick. It can do that in just lickety split.
Which is convenient considering the problems Atari was about to have.
Dude, they can afford to put in 86 different types of chips, but they couldn't afford fucking dust covers. Little dust flaps on top of the system.
Well, because chips are expensive, motherfucker. You think they planned ahead? They didn't even know it wasn't 64 bits. You expect them to think that dust could get in there? No way.
But you know what? They afforded all those extra chips on the fucking board to make it into a mess, and then we're like, all right, now let's take all the extra buttons and just put them all over the controller. Needs more buttons on the face. How many do you have? No, this shit's a fucking rotary phone now. Fuck it, yeah. Yeah, there we go.
Hey, remember the 5200? Remember that fucking $12 million bath we took? Let's do that one more time.
No, I can imagine the design meeting where they were just like, you know that feeling you get when you're watching Star Trek The Next Generation and there's just some dude in a random red shirt pushing buttons on a wall? That's our controller.
Can we get that guy for advertising? I mean, this won't be a tell-all situation whatsoever just by looking at one of our advertisements, but hey, come on. Bleeding Edge, like a hyper-violent anime where you just fucking get your finger gets fucking cut, and then you're just gushing blood out of it. Nah, that's everything's fine. We're fine. We're okay. Don't worry. We're going to be third-party real soon for PlayStation. So,
and everyone else.
Yeah. And we're still gonna do piss poor at that. Yeah.
But hey, they did. So how about that next topic?
Here we can go into the Nintendo 64 because at least that is a positive thing to discuss because
and apparently popular amongst people who are still alive.
Yeah, it's so okay. Now all stigmata jokes aside, the 64 was the shit. It was a badass fucking machine. The library for the 64 is still highly regarded as like some of the best things that came out within that entire generation, and technically pushed the industry forward in a lot of different ways.
In terms of software, I compare the two systems that were out at the time, you know, the PlayStation and the N64, as follows. PlayStation had a lot of games, but there was a lot of shit in there. N64, and there were a few crap games in there. I think they kept the quality higher. They had fewer games, but they kept the ratio of quality a lot higher. Because like it was a weird.
When there was far fewer games on that system.
Yeah, and so they kept the standard pretty high. Like it was interesting because on the PlayStation they would have one or two games every couple years that were huge. With N64, it was like they made sure a crazy huge game came out every year, and when it came out, it was like an event. It was like boom, oh my god, Zelda Ocarina of Time, the first 3D Zelda. Like it was interesting because prior to Ocarina of Time coming out, people talk about Ocarina of Time. Nobody really ever puts it in its historical context. This was like after Final Fantasy VII had dropped on the PlayStation. This was after like basically Sony had won the generation. And then it was like, oh shit, Nintendo's dead. 5 minutes later, Ocarina of Time, and it was a bigger deal when that was announced and came out than when Final Fantasy VII had come out and when Resident Evil.
It's also a big deal to bring up because this was the second time that Nintendo 64 was taking one of their most coveted franchises, and going 3D with it.
Yeah.
And that transition is fucking horrifying. Yeah. Because you get to see, like, you have top down and then side scrolling, and then you have top down again. Okay, well, where the fuck do you go from here? And I mean, the leap in hardware was pretty fucking obvious that you're dealing with a completely different beast. And when Ocarina of Time came out, there wasn't a single motherfucker at all, even people that didn't have a Nintendo 64, that weren't talking about it in schoolyards, in class, that didn't have Nintendo Powers, EGMs, whatever fucking magazine that you had in your hand, just like, oh man, did you see this shit? Even just seeing the logo, I remember like friends just losing their fucking minds because it looks so nice.
Yeah.
And it was the logo, the fucking logo. I mean, that game set the standard in a lot of ways for Super Mario 64 is always going to be credited for pushing 3D games. I feel that Ocarina of Time deserves a lot of the same exact acclaim that Super Mario 64 does. The whole Z targeting system was a really big deal, and it's still something that gets used a lot today. Most people had seen that and they're like, holy shit, that works really well. And it did. And most Legend of Zelda games that have come since then haven't been able to live up to that standard. And there's a lot of people who will say, it's overhyped, it's not nearly as good. But it's a fucking amazing game. I still prefer Majora's Mask, and I'll be one of those fucking weirdos out there, but that's just because of dark themes and shit. But
I was gonna try and find. I have the issue of Nintendo Power that officially revealed Ocarina of Time. I was gonna flip through it for a second, but I couldn't find it. But yeah, it was a big deal. That was why that console generation, I've said this before, I'll say it again, it was weird. If you look in terms of market share, Sony clearly won the generation. But it was this weird kind of tug-of-war where Sony would build momentum, and then Nintendo 64, which had lesser market share, would drop a game, and it would sell more copies than the PlayStation. So it's a weird kind of dichotomy where
Nintendo still has that going on right now.
Yeah, it was like both companies kind of won. It was a very weird kind of debatable, and I think it largely comes down to it was kind of an apples and oranges situation because PlayStation and Nintendo 64 were a completely different beast.
Yeah,
from each other.
Dude, I had a Nintendo 64 before I had a PlayStation because my brother had a PlayStation already.
Yeah.
So I didn't need to go and have one. I could just play his PlayStation, and whenever you got to sit down and play through both libraries, they felt distinct.
Yeah.
Like they really did. I mean, Sony had third party out the fucking ass, and there's no arguing their fucking library is well beyond impressive. I mean, it's my favorite system of all fucking time. I could sit there and fucking gush about it for ages. But the Nintendo 64's library was distinct in the fact that I was playing a lot more platformers on the 64. I was playing a lot more multiplayer games on the Nintendo 64. I mean, anybody who picked up a copy of GoldenEye back in the day knew that was the shit. I mean, Perfect Dark is technically a better game, but GoldenEye came first and did all of it first.
Yeah.
So Perfect Dark was polished.
Think about that for a moment. Like, one of your biggest games and a game that arguably changed the entire arc of multiplayer gaming, of first-person shooters in general. I mean, really, it was the biggest shooter since Doom in a lot of ways in terms of that. Your game was a fucking movie license title for like the 9 billionth James Bond film. What? That's how good it was.
It broke the curse. There was a great curse up to that point of movie licensed games, and that system, that one point in history, changed everything. And then, of course, it all went right back to shit. But for just a moment...
it was more than that, too. I remember a number of movie licensed games on Nintendo 64 being very good. This is actually on PlayStation as well, I think, but the Mission Impossible game is one of the earliest examples of, like, social stealth gameplay. It was kind of like Hitman before Hitman.
We didn't have a lot of stealth games on the 64, and that was one of the few, and I rented that shit from Giant Eagle. Because I was like, oh, I'd really like that, but, the 64 games were fucking expensive. So going and picking that shit up, and dude, that game was badass. Then there was let's see, you also people debate about it a lot, but Winback in a lot of ways never gets nearly the amount of attention that it deserved, and I thought that it earned it.
Well, and even Ocarina of Time had a stealth segment near the end that I remember being like, what the fuck? There was a whole mission where you could just sneak through, which blew my mind at the time. I was like, holy fuck, like this is a year before that was 97, right? This is a year before Metal Gear Solid. This is a year before Thief the Dark Project. This is a year before Tenchu Stealth Assassins. And this is a Zelda game, more importantly. It's in the middle of a Zelda game at the end. And it was interesting because that was kind of 97, 98. That was sort of the year it was like, okay, we can do all these other things in 3D. Why don't we try stealth? Because GoldenEye had stealth segments in it at the beginning. People forget that. That was a big part of GoldenEye's appeal. It was not just the multiplayer shooter. The whole beginning of the game, the whole reason the facility mission is so infamous is because you could play the whole goddamn thing stealth, right until the very end.
I love that because that was one of the reasons. I used to play that and try to stealthily kill everybody. I mean, at a certain point, you kind of have to go and just have a fucking shootout.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's bound to happen. But it gave you a lot of what we would technically consider to be PC tropes.
Yeah.
Where you had role-playing type options where you could go in and do you just want to have a gunfight or do you want to do this as a stealth mission?
Yeah.
And that was way a fucking ahead of the curve by a lot of means. And again, the whole fact that it was a movie license game, dude, and like its actual development, whenever they were making that game, GoldenEye was delayed a lot. And keep in mind, and people forget about this shit, and this is why I'm always going to be somebody that will argue on behalf of development studios delaying a game, is GoldenEye got ridiculed back in the day a lot and was said to be vaporware. Oh, it's going to come out. It's going to be total fucking garbage. That's why they keep on delaying it. Oh, no, it's just a movie license game. It's going to be hot shit. Oh, Rare? No, Rare only did fucking Donkey Kong and Killer Instinct. You know, they're fucking done. What else can they really do? This is the kind of shit that was being said back then. And most people forget because, well, everybody likes to just forget.
Yeah.
But this turned out to be one of the biggest fucking things. I mean, they had their funding pulled. And they continue to make the game on their own.
Yeah.
And they finished the game. It came out.
Yeah. And then it was crazy because then they went right to work on, like, they had to scrap a lot of their ideas in GoldenEye because of the funding being pulled. So what do they do? Fuck it. We'll make Perfect Dark. Now that we're a success, we'll make Perfect Dark. So a lot of the ideas that were supposed to be in GoldenEye were put in Perfect Dark, which is a very underrated game. And they basically got to make their own futuristic version because by then I think Electronic Arts had swooped in and they were like, oh, fuck, the GoldenEye license. Now it's king shit. Now we're going to buy the GoldenEye license. So they were like, fuck, we lost the GoldenEye license.
Electronic Arts, always notorious for being late to the party, but having the biggest paycheck with lots of zeros on it.
And there's some good games that came out of the EA partnership. I'm not bashing EA here. They did The World Is Not Enough, which was pretty good too. That's probably the best James Bond game outside of GoldenEye. But they made a good game here and there, and then they did Rogue Agent. But anyway,
on 64, Rare ended up being like one of the best things about the system. Because Rare was exclusive to Nintendo at that time, and their budding relationship just kept on going and bearing more fruits of their labor. Whenever you're getting the likes of Banjo and Kazooie, Banjo and Tooie, you're getting Conker's Bad Fur Day, Jet Force Gemini, Perfect Dark, GoldenEye,
Donkey Kong 64 was incredible.
Donkey Kong 64, Diddy Kong Racing. The list just continues to go, and their games, like when you heard Rare became one of those companies when you knew they were making something, you wanted to buy it.
Yeah.
That's the sign of a company that obviously is the shit.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Rare's making that. Oh, it'll be good. And that's what
it's most impressive because it was right. It was kind of interesting. If you look at it historically, Rare were grand fucking poobah of that transitional period between sprites and 3D models, right? Like that whole period, they had that shit down pat, right? They were using.
Don't forget, they were a British firm, and British gaming had been pushing for 3D gaming for a long time. Argonaut Software, for instance.
And they had already. You look at what they did on the Donkey Kong Country games.
Yeah.
Where they were using 3D models and just turning them into sprites.
Absolutely.
Which is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And it was way ahead of the curve. And then, of course, other games imitated it, Vector Man and so forth. But, like, it was interesting. They seemed like all these other companies just could not figure out 3D. You see so many examples of shit 3D games. Castlevania anywhere? Just crap jumped to 3D, right? So many games fell prey to this phenomenon. And yet Rare were like, no, let us loose. We're going to do this, right? They were ready to do it before the industry was. And consequently, they just ruled that transitional period in the mid to late 90s, where nobody else could seem to figure out 3D. And they kind of paved the way forward for a bunch of other companies. Like the concept of the modern 3D platformer, which unfortunately is kind of a dead art form at this point. That was them. Yeah.
Well, see, one of the biggest memories for me of the Nintendo 64 was the very first game that I played on it, which was Wave Race 64.
Yeah.
And because when everybody who Christmas of 1996, that's when this shit was coming out, and my parents ended up getting me a Nintendo 64. I didn't have the same Nintendo 64 kid reaction to it because I was half awake because they woke me up at like 5 a.m. So I was just like, that's fucking awesome. Except for I didn't say that because I had just gotten the shit power bombed out of me. But Wave Race 64 was one of the games that I got. And I remember my friends would come down. We'd go and play through the game, which I've absolutely dominated that poor game through and through. But I remember just the effects of the water in it. I never played the one on Game Boy, by the way. I didn't know that shit existed for a long time. I was like, Wave Race is on Game Boy? Oh, that must be a port of 64. What? No.
Yeah.
But playing that, the actual physics engine that they had for the water in it was way ahead of its time. Like, that shit was out of control. Your character reacted to every single wave. They would crash against solid objects accordingly. Like, the shit was so impressive. And considering, and I don't think a lot of people know about this, but Wave Race 64 wasn't going to have the little, like, jet skis at first. It was going to be little boats.
Yeah.
And they were crazy looking like boats and shit, and it had more of a futuristic vibe to it. And this shit was shown in a lot of magazines. And then they ended up reworking the title more, and they had actual character models, which, you know, were all squares and shit, their arms. Like, they didn't have an elbow joint, so if their arm went too much like that, it just a big chunk was missing, and it's just like a horror show, like, and it's like it's fucking gone. But like, seeing that, and they
are negative elbow.
Oh yeah, they didn't have that shit. 64 was like, nah, you don't even need that. Get in or get out. Like, and dude, one of the biggest licenses, one of the biggest franchises right now that Nintendo has, is started on the 64, and that was Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah,
and that began on there, and dude, that blew people's minds because I still remember the commercial. All the Nintendo characters skipping through the fields and shit, and then to start beating the shit out of each other. It was just like, yeah.
And it kind of came out of nowhere, I remember. There wasn't a lot of prelude to Smash Brothers.
No.
It was just like that game dropped and boom, right? It was like that commercial hit, and then suddenly the press blitz was on, and suddenly it was everyone's favorite party game out of nowhere. Yeah. That was not a case of like hype determining the success of a game at all. I think honestly, if you look back on it, you think probably Nintendo was like, we'll roll the dice on this. You know, it's a lot of tried and true characters, but it's a weird concept. So we'll throw it out there. We'll advertise it. If it takes off, it takes off. And then of course it just shot to the fucking moon.
Dude, it like the early versions of that game had no Nintendo characters. They had their own cast of characters, and then eventually
they look like shit.
It looked like fucking rubbish. It was pretty bad. Like, the actual character models that they were using looked more realistic, and because of that, they looked bad. Like, they looked very, very bad. And I forgot exactly who within Nintendo pitched the idea of, why don't you use Nintendo characters? They're like, okay. So they threw X amount together into a battle, and it was well received in the offices. They were like, fuck it, go with it.
Yeah.
So they went and they threw that together. I think, was it the dude who does Kirby, who made Kirby? He was like one of the main people working on that game. And he, like, anytime that you see interviews with him, he said he was always worried about over representation of one brand. And especially since they'll seem a little bit biased because, you know, well, I made fucking Kirby and shit, but, you know, Kirby, Meta Knight, King DDD, he didn't want to go overboard and shit. And now it's one of the biggest fucking franchises out there. I mean, there's tournaments for this shit. Every single time a Smash Brothers game gets launched, millions sell. fucking millions day one. Get that shit out the door. Doesn't matter. Nintendo could if they brought the Nintendo Switch and they were just like, oh yeah, we're just gonna have Smash Brothers game day one. Motherfuckers would just be like, oh no.
Yeah. To understand the success of Smash Brothers right now, fucking process this, folks. It's the only game that's approaching. I don't know if it's eclipsed yet, but I know that it was really close to hitting 10 million units sold for a single console on first party. The only game this generation. Nothing on PS4 has sold that much. Nothing on Xbox One has sold that much. It's on Wii U. It's on Wii U, which has considerably less market share than its competitors. That's fucking nuts.
The best way to look at that is that's basically saying about 1 in 3 Wii U owners have Super Smash Brothers for Wii U.
Yep.
That right there is a very telling story of this shit. Obviously, it's big, like it's huge, and yeah. I mean, in 64, that's where that started. And the third-party offerings on 64, they get overlooked, but there was good shit on there. The Goemon Mystical Ninja games, I didn't get to try them out on Super Nintendo. I tried it out first on Nintendo 64. And this was Konami, like, in their fucking prime. Like, these motherfuckers were just like, yeah, let's do this. And Mystical Ninja, I love the shit out of.
Yeah, like, I love that game. Such a good game.
It's so fun running around and just with that fucking pipe weapon, whatever the fuck that he has, and you're just cracking fucking skulls of all the like painty thieves that are running around, and then ghosts are coming to kill you and shit. And
it was cool too, because you could, you got to play as that. You got there were multiple playable characters. I remember there were like 4 different characters you could play as, and they were all badass. Except for the fat ninja guy, and no, he was fine, but it was pretty cool. You could actually, like, it was open world. It was, you think of it, that game was way ahead of its time. It was open world. It was narrative driven. There were cinematics in this game on Nintendo 64. That was not something that was happening at the time at all. It was barely happening on PlayStation, and it was completely like open-ended. Basically, there were, for lack of a better term, side quests, because you could really go anywhere on the map that you wanted, which was really fucking cool. That game was just really interesting, and there was shops and so forth.
I thought that it was kind of awesome that between the two that we had on Nintendo 64, if you played them, they were pretty different experiences, because one was most definitely a 3D game. The other one was a 2D game that was also 3D.
Yeah, it was like 2.5D. They did quite a bit of that on Nintendo 64, and pretty successfully, might I add, with a number of games.
They did it with Kirby in 64, which
they did it with Yoshi too, I believe.
Well, the thing that fucking kills me about, like, I've seen a lot of people shit on Kirby 64, the crystal shards and shit. Like they were just like, oh no, that it's not that good. And I liked that one because, like, one of the cool things about Kirby was, he can eat a bunch of enemies and he gets all these cool powers. Well, in this, he had like double the amount of powers that you could get because you were combining them together and then getting even more different powers. It was like, that's awesome. And I say this while there's a big fucking Kirby plushie sitting over by a light switch staring at me and almost threatening me in a way. But it's that game got overlooked a whole lot, and which is weird because Nintendo first party typically doesn't get overlooked a lot. It just doesn't. It's, if you have a Nintendo system, you're buying Nintendo games, or you're a fucking idiot. And Kirby 64 was one of those games just didn't get enough attention. Oh, back to the fucking third party talk. Castlevania did not do well in 3D.
Oh no, not at all.
Oh man, that shit. Trying to whip enemies in 3D, what's fucked up is there was honestly good shit within those games. Like the music, for example, was really good, despite the fact it wasn't CD quality music.
Yeah.
But the composition of the music, it was so fucking awesome.
What was the one? It was after Castlevania 64 where there were werewolves and shit in
Legacy of Darkness.
That I remember being okay.
Legacy of Darkness is just the first game, but with more shit, and they fixed some of the problems.
Yeah,
namely, like some of the camera issues.
And I remember enjoying it. I wouldn't say it was one of my favorites or anything, but it was playable, which is more than you could say for 64 most of the time.
I remember it being a hot pile of trash and dicks myself. But
Hey, look, it was a Castlevania game where you had skeletons on motorcycles. So, I mean, that alone is kind of badass. They just come in all Hell's Angels like.
And speaking of which, a game that doesn't get nearly enough praise, and it's just a franchise that's kind of fallen by the wayside in recent years anyways, is F-Zero X, which was just fucking badass on Nintendo 64.
For anybody who's listening to this podcast, please, for the love of fucking God, find the F-Zero X Guitar Arrange soundtrack. Get it immediately torrented, downloaded illegally, open a fucking different YouTube tab, get the fucking music. It is one of the best soundtracks in gaming, period.
You can find it at khinsider.org.
And it's hilarious because you don't even really need a guitar arrangement because it already had guitars. That's one of the few games where they started out metal. Like they didn't turn metal. It just was metal.
Dude, what's fucked up about it is like I love that soundtrack so much. I went to see who worked on it. The couple dudes that they had work on it have done tons of music for Nintendo.
Yeah.
What's strange though is they didn't really do anything metal.
Yeah.
And I was just like, wait a minute. So you guys have the ability to churn out this, and that was the only time you did it. I would love to just like kickstart anything, but like please just make another F-Zero and get those two together. Make it.
Yeah, it's like, well, it was interesting. It's kind of a contrast too, because I've always lamented this. I've never talked about it in a video, but it has always bothered me. Mega Man, right? In Japan, he's called Rockman. The idea of the character is that he's supposed to represent like heavy metal. This is why all the characters are like, okay, fucking bass and treble, and this is why they're all named after musical kind of things. Mega Man is supposed to be metal. The only reason the Mega Man soundtracks are synth or whatever is because that's all the Nintendo Entertainment System could do. Ideally, that would have been guitar. Ideally, that would have been heavy metal.
You could say the same thing about F-Zero on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, one of the reasons, same deal with F-Zero on Super Nintendo and with Mega Man X. People need to understand, like, the reason those soundtracks translate so well to guitar is because they were written on guitar. All right.
Oh yeah.
And that's why it's always bothered me. Like the ultimate dream thing that I've wanted to see for many, many years is just remaster all the Mega Man games and put in the original heavy metal soundtracks without any of the 8-bit bullshit. But of course now people would fucking throw a fit and be like, but the synth, it's all about the synth.
Well, they have there's a lot of arranged soundtracks that are out there that end up giving you kind of what you should be hearing. With the soundtracks, like if anybody, not Nintendo 64 related whatsoever, but if you've ever played Thunder Force 4, and which is Lightning Force, if you ever play that one, it's hands down in like my top 5 shoot 'em ups ever made. It's brutally fucking difficult, but one of the most gorgeous Genesis games, but the soundtrack. Oh my God, the fucking music in it. All you need to do is, as soon as you're done just like jizzing your pants over the F-Zero X soundtrack, listen to a song called Metal Squad.
Yeah. And
never turn back. Because, I mean, technically the entire soundtrack is really good, but fuck, man.
That's great too. It's great too because you can tell they had just listened to all the names and everything. You can tell that they had just listened to the band UDO. Accept's frontman formed UDO later. He did an album called Time Bomb, and all the songs on the Thunder Force soundtrack, there's a song called Thunder Force. There's a song called Power Squad. There's a song called, like, they all named them after fucking UDO. So, like, they had just heard that album. You can tell because UDO is huge in Japan. Same with Accept. But brilliant soundtrack. One of the best on the Genesis, which is saying something because the Genesis, the music, the like MIDI player, whatever you want to say, the soundboard, I suppose, on the Genesis was limited. If you did Genesis soundtracks wrong, they could just wind up sounding like a fucking fart factory, right? Just like it just didn't sound right.
Actually, they sound like a player piano underwater is what it sounds like.
Essentially. So, but if you worked it, you could really crank out some gems, and there are some gems on that.
That's some of the stuff. I've always been a big defender of the Genesis sound chip because everybody always said that it was inferior, and I was like, here, let me go and correct your stupid fucking retarded ass because you don't know anything. The Genesis made it one. It has its own unique sound. That's one of the things that made it so fucking badass was it had a sound to it. If you tell me that the Genesis couldn't produce good music after you played Streets of Rage 2, I will beat the shit through you. Not out of you, through you. It will pass through you. Because that music was amazing. If you ever played any of the fucking Sonic games, which I sure as fuck hope that you have, the music in those, amazing.
Yeah. And for fuck's sake, when you get Michael Jackson to compose a fucking soundtrack for your game, you're going to have some good music on your fucking games, period. All right? So clearly there's a virtue there. But that's another thing. Like, during that whole era with the Nintendo 64, Sega was kind of going through its own shit at the same time with the Saturn and kind of trying to find its identity, which was interesting because Nintendo, I feel, during the 64 era, got even more Nintendo. You know what I mean? Like that to me, I think the 64 era is when the Nintendo brand sort of codified. That's when they had been forming sort of the stable of Nintendo games before that on Super Nintendo and so forth. But I feel like Nintendo 64 is when it was like, okay, here's what Nintendo's going to be going forward. It's going to be Donkey Kong. It's going to be Kirby. It's going to be Mario something. It's going to be Zelda. That's what it's going to be like.
Well, they build up an impressive catalog, and they still are even today. But back then, you figure you had Nintendo and Super Nintendo to go, like you had 2 generations and a lot of fucking years to build up all these franchises. And now Nintendo 64 was, hey, so it's the 90s, and we're heading on into the future. Shit's 3D now. And this isn't something that's just strictly for PC anymore. You can get this shit for an affordable price right in your living room inside of a console. And they did just that. I mean, the 64 always ended up getting a lot of shit from developers and from fans because they opted for cartridges versus CDs at the time. And admittedly, it was a fucking shit move in a lot of ways for them.
It was only a shit move because cartridges weren't there yet. That was why. If you did a cartridge machine now, it would basically be a thumb drive game. Right?
Yeah. Oh no. Nowadays we've actually got we've got the tech now because you can go get a micro SD card with 128 gigabytes on it and just have a fucking field day. You can get flash drives with like 500 on it. Like, they're ridiculous now. And don't even get me fucking started on anything that's even solid state related, like anything like that. But with back in 1996, and considering that they were developing the system for a couple years prior to that, it just wasn't there. So for companies to come forward, they were just like, hey, well, we want to make games for you. And they're like, all right, well, you also have to pay for the cost of the cartridges, which was high as fuck. Yeah. So say you're a small studio.
And even worse, if you wanted to do anything weird with the cartridge, it cost even more too. If you wanted to do like add more memory or whatever the fuck, because there were some cartridges that were like they had expansions on them and shit like that. You know, you
too. That was one of the biggest cartridges that they had out there. As a matter of fact, that to me is like one of the biggest milestones.
Absolutely stunning, absolutely stunning. Which is the way they made those cutscenes run like that. I remember seeing that and was just, I mean.
Yeah,
it was amazing.
They're compressed to shit, but I'll still say to this day, up until like the re-releases later, I feel like the Nintendo 64 version of Resident Evil 2 is the best one you can play because you get all the extra shit from the PS1 version unlocked on the N64 version, and you don't have to fuck around with the loading times. There's no loading times at all. So well, it's like there are advantages to cartridge.
Oh no, that was always one of the advantages. Cartridges was loading times didn't really exist, and back in the 90s, loading times existed a lot on PlayStation and Saturn, and also on PC because lots of PC games were using CDs at that point. But it wasn't a cost-effective measure. So for like Capcom, for example, Capcom's got deep pockets, and the Resident Evil franchise at that point was a runaway fucking success.
Yeah.
So they were just like, you know what, fuck it. We can jam 2 CDs into one cartridge. One, people weren't even capable of jamming a CD into a cartridge. They took 2. Fucking 2. Complete with the music, complete with spoken dialogue, complete with fucking cutscenes, which, yes, the cutscenes were fucking compressed to shit and back. But the fact that it was even possible,
and it's not like it's compressed to shit you can't tell what's going on. It still looks fine. It still looks passable, you know. And the end game graphics on top of that look better because it's, you know, a 64-bit system instead of 32. So you know the player models are less jaggy and they're more smooth. And
it was fucking awesome as shit. Like seeing that, because let's see, Capcom, they had ported that. They also ported Mega Man Legends, which we got as Mega Man 64. And most people end up forgetting that's what that is. They think that's a different game. I'm like, stop that. No, it's just that. Just everything was something 64. Like, hey, we're putting Pilot Wings on a system. What's it called? Pilot Wings 64. Fuck it. It works. and it did. And God, you know what's weird? I still feel bad, but man, I got so bored playing Pilot Wings when I was a kid. I tried to like it.
Dude, Pilot Wings, it's funny. It has like a good reputation now. I remember everyone being like, Pilot Wings. like Pilot Wings was the game your parents got you when they didn't know what to get with the Nintendo 64. It was the great big lump of gaming coal under the Christmas tree.
Well, it was also the game your mom played if she just couldn't get into Tetris.
Well, what you had to do was get her Golden Nugget 64, that one Vegas game or whatever. Oh, it was like, toss that to fucking, oh, God damn it. I don't know why the hell I forgot this. The racing genre on Nintendo 64 was out of control.
Oh.
I mean...
we just mentioned F-Zero X, but fucking Mario Kart 64.
Okay. Mario Kart 64 is one of the best multiplayer games ever. Ever. It still has one of the best battle modes in the franchise's history.
And as good as it was, Rare was like, oh, fuck that shit. Diddy Kong Racing. We're not only going to give you go-karts and do that better than Mario Kart 64, we're going to give you planes, and we're going to give you bumper boats, and we're going to let you pick more characters, and we're going to have an open world map for you to explore while you're going to all the different tracks.
The little hub world that they had for it, every time I played that one, on Donkey Kong 64, also had gotten that after I got Mario Kart 64, I got everything on there. Fucking everything. There wasn't a single secret that was out of my reach. There wasn't a single boss that I couldn't beat. I mean, into fucking submission. But that game was so fucking good. And then I played Crash Team Racing, and they were like, we can do that too. And I was like, well, shit. Also, same exact thing with that. But Mario Kart, you know, they set the standard. But it was nice that other companies could come in and match the quality. Let alone you're getting the same exact quality on the same exact system with people using the licensed characters. And it was fucking awesome. If you ever got to play something like Beetle Adventure Racing, that game is one of the best third-party racing games on the system. Tons of alternate tracks that you can go down, lots of secrets and shit. I mean, I thought it was kind of lame because they were using Volkswagen Beetles, which, you know, the only good reason you'd ever have one is to fucking an uncomfortable position in the back seat. But that was an awesome-ass game. And I was just like, fuck, man. They had the, oh my God.
Well, the other game that, you know, it hasn't aged so well, but it was king shit at that time. I remember it was a big arcade hit. Was Cruisin' USA.
Dude, I was just
Cruisin' USA. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, they're making a new one right now.
Yeah, and like I said, you go back and play it, and it's like, wow, what was all the hype about? But you have to understand, it's like the very beginning germinative stage.
In 1997, fire coming out of a tailpipe was a big deal.
You have to understand, like there were a lot of firsts on that game.
It sounds much lamer when I say it out loud, though.
And now you got Mad Max, where you got like 16 tailpipes belching fire with giant spike wheels.
Dude, I love that Mad Max took a lot of the things that I liked about Robot Wars, and they're like, now we'll make this shit life size, and then we're gonna look metal as fuck, and we're gonna stand on it with like skulls and shit all over, and everybody is wearing tons of spikes, and all I want is for somebody to be like, just one person, and then their head explodes. Just one. I kind of need that. At some point, but if we are going to talk about 64, something that should be discussed is the 64 DD.
Yeah.
The 64 yes. Dude, the 64 DD. What sucks about it is I wish that they would have decided to capitalize off of some of the stuff that they already made for it later on.
Wait. What sucks about it is it doesn't mean what you think it means. Anyway.
I'll elaborate.
Well, 64 DD, and if you don't know what that means, then you really like video games, don't you?
There you go.
Or you anyway, like the right kind of Japanese video games.
Yeah, the 64 DD, or for those of you who are not up on your history, what happens when you don't pay attention to Sega making mistakes?
Yeah.
The 64 DD had awesome shit on it. It's just that it was a fucking add-on. And
it's sort of. I mean, the one that sticks out to me, if we're gonna go back to F-Zero X, because why not? F-Zero X had something called the F-Zero X expansion kit for the 64 DD, which allowed you, and now mind you, again, like I said, we're going back to an era when fire coming out of a tailpipe was a big deal.
Yeah.
You had the opportunity to modify and make your own courses in F-Zero X. Now, that doesn't sound, well, that actually still sounds like a really cool thing, because I understand it works. Anytime I've ever seen a 3D racing space where the user can generate their own courses, it's a hot fucking mess. Now, I've never played it myself, and so for that, I lament.
Yeah. Well, the version that they had, which they've had track creation, but it was on the Japanese-only handheld versions. And that always drove me up a wall, because it was like, why don't you make, like, they were re-releasing 64 games on the 3DS. F-Zero X would have been awesome to release as the actual DD version of it, and put that on there, just, with all the bells and whistles of the bump and hardware. And that, if you look at the way that they let you create it, it's like Roller Coaster Tycoon. Like, no,
very much so.
You can twist and turn and corkscrews and loop-de-loops and jumps. Everything and anything you can think of inside those stages, they let you do. And a lot of the creator type stuff that they did, because they had I forgot the official name for it, but it was a 3-part series where it was like the Mario Paint, the Music Maker, and some other shit. They had that on there, and I was a big fan of Mario Paint. And then they were doing all this creation studio type stuff on there.
Mario teaches typing.
Was it?
Mario teaches typing. Come on. Everyone remembers Mario teaches the typing.
Dude, some of the dialogue that he has in that is fucking horrifying. I mean, it's legitimately scary. Somebody had put it into like a creepypasta, and I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, it actually is creepy. But dude, they were working on a Legend of Zelda for the 64 DD, and I don't know if the rumblings were talking about bringing back one of the initial concepts for the very first Legend of Zelda with it, but you could make your own dungeons. And that was something a lot of people forget about. The very first Legend of Zelda, it wasn't just like an open world where you got to run around as Link and just go and do shit and save everything. It was you made your own dungeons and then you let your friends try to go through them. Like you had like puzzles and shit, you had monsters and all that. It's just that you made that. Well, this was to go and take that original concept and apply it to this, because now they had that bump in storage capacity thanks to using the disk drive, and a bump in memory that would be able to go and like showcase all this shit in such a way that it wouldn't just like cause it to fucking break down and just start fire. And I thought that was cool as fuck. There was supposed to be Super Mario 64 where it was going to be 2-player. Like they had all these fucking plans. None of them panned out. And some of the ideas they ended up doing shit with, but it's a shame that it kind of just fizzled. And now if you want one, you're paying like hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, to get one.
Well, and these ideas honestly would have been better brought to the GameCube, and unfortunately, it sounds like a lot of them weren't. You know, looking back, those are probably ideas that they should have carried forward.
Well, there's a lot of ideas that I think get left on the cutting room floor.
Speaking of which, we should probably talk about the canceled 64 games.
Oh, you know what? This was one of the ones before we had done like the entire show. This was something that got brought up. Final Fantasy VII originally was conceptualized for the Nintendo 64.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know that, but when they originally were trying to go and test out the hardware and shit, they had their little kit together. So they took Final Fantasy VI character models. So you have Locke, and he's out there, and he's swinging at some big-ass fucking rock golem and shit, and everything looked so crisp, so smooth, so badass. And granted, it's running on the kit, which, you know, is going to have a amped-up resolution and look a lot nicer, but it was still impressive.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Final Fantasy VII, as we know, it came on 3 fucking CDs, and it was a massive-ass game. To go and do that on a cartridge at the time with the limited knowledge that they had back then, the game would have cost like $250 fucking dollars to go and buy.
And I'm hearing, they would have had to use multiple cartridges, I think.
It was like without a doubt. And considering that they would have had to cut back on a lot of the ideas that they had.
Yeah.
Which in many ways were selling points for the game. Like CG cutscenes were kind of like a big thing, because that gave you like a cinematic storytelling that we didn't really have a lot back then. But that wouldn't have been fucking possible on those cartridges. You'd have like a cutscene on one cartridge. Insert cartridge 12. Okay.
And this has to be said. A big reason why Final Fantasy VII wound up going to the Sony PlayStation had to do with business. It was just Sony offered to finance the advertisement of the game and a bunch of other things. They gave them a bunch of other goodies because PlayStation was doing okay, but they had beaten Sega. They had not beaten Nintendo yet. Basically, that was the position PlayStation was at the time. So it was kind of a weird. They needed a knockout punch. Sony did, and I think they recognized that, because otherwise they wouldn't be taken seriously. So they're like, you know what, this fucking Final Fantasy deal. Well, let's just push this to the moon and back. And that's why, if you were a kid during the late 90s, you remember advertisements for Final Fantasy VII everywhere. When we did our episode with Johnny Millennium, Happy Console Gamer, he was talking about like advertisements for Final Fantasy VII were on the side of like the monorail in Canada. Like they were everywhere. I remember we had them. There were Final Fantasy VII posters at like bus stops. They actually put posters up at fucking bus stops and shit here in the States. And for example, I've talked about this before, but this is the ultimate expression of how big the marketing push was for Final Fantasy VII. I'm sitting in a movie theater watching an advertisement for a video game before a movie. Yeah. I'm at school I'm in a freaking school. They used to have like the closed circuit televisions in, the television network in school where you're sitting in homeroom or whatever, and they would be playing what was it? Channel 1 News. It was this thing produced by ABC, and they would have advertisements in between, because why wouldn't you advertise to a captive audience of children? And Final Fantasy VII, the big cinematic advertisement. They advertised it like a movie. I'm watching an advertisement for a video game in school. That shit didn't happen. They didn't let that happen, right? But that's what Sony did for Final Fantasy VII. Is why I've always said Final Fantasy VII, though I don't like it as a game, and I don't think it's that impressive as a game, is a triumph of advertising. Video games were never advertised the same again after Final Fantasy VII.
One of the best things about that generation, which I think is one of the reasons why I still love it as much as I do, is it is the best transitional state of gaming ever.
Yeah.
Because that's when gaming started getting taken serious in general. This was no longer just like oh, that's just something you keep the kids busy with, or arcades were just for teenagers who want to go and do some drugs and shit. No, wasn't anything like that. We were taking over entertainment as you know it. Brace your fucking asses, and they did. And the marketing for that game was absolutely fucking explosive. One of the ads that I still remember, and I got a big fucking laugh out of it, and I had a 64 and was still laughing about this because it was such balls, was they had the Junin cannon and just said, somebody might want to get a blindfold and cigarette for the guys who still make cartridge games.
Yeah, I remember
There
that.
was only one company who did that. And the thing is, most people don't remember this, but when Sony decided, or when Squaresoft decided, okay, we're going to make games for Sony, which was a smart move on their part, Nintendo took that as a big slap in the fucking face because Squaresoft wasn't making games for anybody else, just Nintendo. And they were just like, well, fuck you. Those two kind of hated each other. It was like a bitter divorce.
Yeah,
and this
was right after because Super Mario RPG was like 94. This is right after they had worked side by side to make one of the best RPGs ever.
Yeah,
right?
and to see it go from that, I mean, obviously now that shit's squashed, but it's still just one of those things like that was a big fucking deal. And there were so many, I just love that generation because it offered so many firsts, and the Nintendo 64 was one of those things. And speaking of transitions, this will be an easier transition talking about unreleased stuff. Since Final Fantasy VII became unreleased, do you chaps want to talk about some unreleased games?
Oh, fucking...
We've tried 3 times now.
We were talking about Mega Man Legends. They were supposed to make Mega Man Legends 2 on the N64. And another one, speaking of rare games and speaking of Star Fox as well, earlier we were talking about 3D platformers by Rare. They were supposed to make Star Fox Adventures, or before that it was supposed to be Dinosaur Planet. They were supposed to make that on Nintendo 64.
Well,
there's a few other ones. The one that raised my eyebrows, I heard a few years back. This blew my fucking mind. That the original Dead or Alive was supposed to be on Nintendo 64.
What?
I'm like, titty physics on a I don't see titty physics on a Nintendo console.
I mean, they would have been fantastic on the 64. Those polygons would have been looking good.
I don't see it at all.
I just imagine it'd be a big pink fog.
The closest thing I can think of is on Conker's Bad Fur Day when there's a flower with huge tits.
Oh,
what?
If you ever get to, have you guys played the first Dead or Alive?
No.
No.
Oh, okay, so like no joke. If you look in old magazines and shit, they talk about the titty physics a lot. They're just like, oh yes, the breast will actually bounce, and like they talk about it, and it's fucking hilarious. Then you play the game, like look up footage of it. So their physics, like the tits are doing, like they're everywhere. They are out of control. It's like moon physics for granny titties. Like tits are down here, and they're just like, do the wave. It's all right. It's so fucking silly looking. Like it's like a fucking clown show with like hot anime chicks.
Another one I remember getting canceled, speaking of the like big PlayStation games that was canceled on Nintendo 64, probably the other big system seller for PlayStation no one talks about anymore because the franchise only recently came back after a long dormancy period. It's Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider was supposed to come out for 64. I remember. And that would have been a huge fucking deal and a huge get for them, basically.
Dude, it never made sense to me.
Yeah.
Like back then, why it didn't happen? Because Tomb Raider was on PC, it was on Saturn, it was on PlayStation, and you left it off of there. I mean, Game Boy Color got a fucking Tomb Raider game, but Nintendo 64 didn't. And we're talking about a game that is fully 3D. Like, it made so much fucking sense, and I think it would have done well because if you shit Lara Croft's image onto anything in the 90s, people were buying it up and then masturbating in a dark fucking corner with it. It was just like, it sold like fucking hotcakes.
Yeah.
And God, what a fucking missed opportunity. Oh, Star Fox 2 for SNES.
Forget about it. Yeah, and that dovetails into the 64 topic because Star Fox 2 was canceled basically when it was completed. It was done. It was basically done. They only had they did tweak a couple minor things, but it was basically finished. And they sat on it. They didn't fucking release it. And so all that existed for years was this Japanese demo of it. Thank God someone later on went through and they did their hacking ROM magic and they translated it to English and they finished whatever was unfinished. And so there's a fully playable ROM out there. I mean, a completely licensed legal game that you can buy from a licensed retailer. But piracy's bad, children. But
if you want your red cartridges, just have your $69.95 ready. And never mind.
But the game's fantastic. And they implemented a few elements from it in Star Fox 64, which was basically they canceled the game because they were like, nah, fuck it. We'll do Star Fox 64 so we can sell this console. And thank God they did. The game was great. But they like the whole Star Wolf concept, I remember, came from that. I think more of the cockpit mode stuff was in there. All range mode was an invention of Star Fox 2 as well. There's a lot of stuff they wound up carrying over. And what little was left, they wound up using for Star Fox Zero.
Well, did either of you play Star Fox Command?
Yes, I did.
They brought a lot of Star Fox 2 stuff into that as well. That's basically like a remake of Star Fox 2 in a weird way.
In a way.
I try to point out to a bunch of people, I'm like, Star Fox Command is technically like a lot of the assets from that. And I've played through, if you play through Star Fox 2 and like when you get the ROM, put it on the hardest setting that you possibly can, because putting on easy or normal, you will just burn right through the game. And you're also missing out on a lot of the game because there's a lot of stages that are inaccessible to the much easier difficulties. But when you get inside a what the fuck is the little land moving vehicle where it's got the two legs?
Oh, I forget the like biped thing.
Yeah, the walker.
It's goofy, like them games. But when you're running around as that, dude, it was a fully 3D game. You're going inside of different areas. You're shooting the living fuck out of everything. I was like, this is so awesome, picking up emblems and shit. And I had such a ball with that game. And I was like, Nintendo still has this. Let's just make that perfectly clear. Nintendo still has this. Just put it on the fucking eShop. You know that it's out there on the internet. It's circulated 1,001 times. Go make money off of this and make it official.
Yeah. I don't get why they wouldn't. I don't understand if there's some kind of weird licensing thing because the old developers don't work there anymore. But I imagine Nintendo has that shit locked down.
Yeah.
You know, you could release that fucking game. Maybe they don't want to cut into sales of Command. I don't know. That's fucking weird.
The shit confuses me, and I think it's kind of a bummer because it's a really fun game. And like going through a lot of different articles that I got to read is Kirby on GameCube. They made like 3 or 4 fucking Kirby games, and they all got shit canned. Like I'm talking like fully realized games. We're talking like 50 to 75% completion rate. And they were just like, yeah, done. Moved on to the next thing. And they just kept on doing this over and over. And I just wonder, what the fuck do you have sitting around that has not seen the light of day that would be fun as hell? I mean, that shit would be absolutely golden. And I mean, for another Nintendo game that was completely finished, did not see the light of day, and again, circulated around the internet, is the very first Mother game, or the first technical Earthbound on NES, the Famicom version. They had that shit completed. Like there was,
and they canceled Mother 3 on the N64.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude, that. They said, well, we weren't really worried much about it because a lot of the stuff we ended up using in Mother 3 on Game Boy Advance. I'm like, but you still had a game. You still had a game. Like, why just toss the shit to the side? I mean, Mother 1, the prototype cartridge that they had floating around ended up going for X amount of dollars in some kind of auction. So somebody ripped the ROM and tossed it onto the internet. Now, that shit was done. It was just fucking done. And considering that, you know, since Earthbound on SNES, which wasn't a runaway success at all, but since then has, I mean, lots of people like that series. And it's gotten such a large fan base, and Nintendo still hasn't capitalized off of it. You got the finished first game, just release that onto the eShop. Make the fucking money off of it. You already spent it developing the game, and you already know people are playing it on their own, on their phones, and on hacked systems and on PC. Why the fuck not? It's there. Like, it's done. It's not even like you have to do any work. You just put it up onto the store and just wait for money to come in. As a matter of fact, the news of that would be enough to get people to jump all over that shit. And it's there. Mr. Chaos, what unreleased games would you like to throw into this hat, which is a very deep
Well,
hat?
the one that, you know, I'm surprised you didn't steer into, which was Metroid 64. Very little discussion ever about Metroid 64. All I've heard is speculation and seen, you know, some body models, but I know that it was at one time they thought about it, and then I don't know. I've never really been. I like Metroid games myself, so I don't really want to say that I know it's a game that would have sold well.
I think it would have regardless, because I remember people talking about it. Metroid was that franchise where it was like, okay, we got Zelda, we got Donkey Kong, we got all these main franchise, we got Kirby, we got Mario. What's the deal? Where's Metroid? That's the one. It was conspicuous by its absence, and it was becoming like, what, did they just not want a Metroid game? What the fuck is going on? Is this just a dead franchise now? You know, so I think it would have sold even if it was shit, honestly, because there were plenty of games on N64 that weren't of the highest quality that sold. You know?
And with Metroid, considering how well they transitioned their 2D games into 3D, I think that a Metroid 64 game would have done phenomenally. But we also may not have gotten the Metroid Prime games.
That's true. That may have set us in a different direction.
That's one of the things that I worry about. But, you know, I love the Metroid Prime games. I think they are all of the highest quality in terms of like the franchise's legacy. But I would love to have seen what they may have done with a Metroid game on the Nintendo 64. You know, just running around in those gigantic caverns and shit, going and shooting stuff up. I can imagine that the whole Z-targeting thing that I thought I was talking about with Legend of Zelda. Imagine that with a Metroid game on 64.
And that was the thing. That was the thing that you know, I understand it's an unpopular opinion. I've never gotten into the Metroid Prime games or any of the first person. I didn't like the concept of a first person Metroid game. I still don't. I still don't care for it. And I always have been like, no, give me a third person, because to me that's Metroid. When I first played Metroid, it was in third person. When I first played a Super Metroid, it was in third person. When they moved it to first person, I just lost interest. So I think it would have been interesting to see what their original concept would have been, because I assume it would have been in third person.
Oh, no, it most definitely would have been third person, because even when was it Retro Studios who whenever they pitched the idea of it being in first person, Nintendo wasn't sold on it at all. Originally, it was until they gave them something to chew on, and they were like, "Oh, all right, yeah, roll with it." Still apprehensive, which is understandable because you're still handing off your franchise to somebody else to work on it. But obviously, you got to fucking trust them to even bother building that relationship. And Metroid 64, I haven't really seen much info on it, which again, it's a fucking shame that didn't happen, and we didn't even get one for Wii U. So I'm just hoping that with the Switch, we end up seeing something like that.
Would be nice.
Dude, it's long overdue. The franchise is way too important. Like F-Zero and Metroid are two franchises I just feel like aren't getting their just dues. And it's weird because you got Nintendo franchises, but with Metroid and F-Zero, I feel like they stand out. They're more of like the alternative type franchises from Nintendo that are very different, and I dig that.
Well, if you look at the internet long enough, you'll see that it's clear that Metroid is very popular in terms of inspiring animated pornography.
Yeah.
Metroid is the all-time fucking champion. Samus Aran in the Zero suit and the less than Zero suit is just the most popular thing for, your perverse needs.
There was an interesting. I would be remiss not to mention this game as well because I'm such a flight sim nut. The Lethal, what the fuck is it called? Lethal Encounter was supposed to be on Nintendo 64, and it really would have been the only like proper flight sim on the Nintendo 64. That was another one where you had, because Nintendo 64 and PlayStation were in that weird era where PC gaming was growing up. Because late 90s, as great as it was for consoles, way better on PC. Like, just a huge watershed moment. Gaming today was influenced tremendously by PC gaming of the late 90s and early 2000s. And, but yeah, that was that era where you see a lot of games. I think Battle Cruiser 3000 AD was also supposed to come to N64. That's the little shout out to Derek Smart there. That's a pretty good game. But that was supposed to come to N64. There was a lot of games that were they were weighing their options. Some of them even had completed builds of a Nintendo 64 version and just never dropped. And Lethal Encounter was one of those. I would have liked to see that because I think it would have given the console a different flavor. It was like, oh, we can do kind of flight games now.
Well, that was one of the things that I felt. If I could ever bring up something that I felt was a weak point for the 64 was diversity. Yeah. And that was one of the biggest strengths of the PlayStation at the time, which is why it ended up just like rolling over so many things. Is it had everything. They had fucking everything in spades. And
it kind of Nintendo 64 at a certain point kind of lapsed into the 3D platformer machine. Yeah, a little bit.
It did, but if it's going to be known as the 3D platforming machine, that's fine because it still has some of the best. So if you ever just like, man, I really love that genre. You like the Nintendo 64 then? I'm like, of course, I'm not a fucking idiot. That makes sense.
Not only that, we were talking about GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. I can't believe this completely slipped my mind. Everyone loves Perfect Dark. Everyone fucking hates Perfect Dark Zero. There was supposed to be a sequel on N64 or GameCube. We're not really sure. There are screenshots and so forth from GameCube, so I assume they had just pushed it back. But there was supposed to be a game called Velvet Dark in between them, and it actually looks good, which is a fucking shame because Rare was still kind of holding on to relevance at that time. Would have been fucking cool to get that on either on N64, which probably would have been a little late for that because Perfect Dark was pretty late in the Nintendo 64 timeline anyways. But would have been cool to see that game see the light of day as well.
Well, there's one game that came out around that era, which we did talk about, was Resident Evil 2. Well, Resident Evil has had a number of titles in its franchise's history shit-canned. And one of them, which is extremely famous, is Resident Evil 1.5, the original version of Resident Evil 2. And this is one I've done so much research over the years. I feel like I'm a walking fucking encyclopedia for this game that no one got to play. And it's like the most useless fucking knowledge to an extent until I'm on the 8-Bit Podcast doing episode 64 and get to talk about this shit. But the original version of Resident Evil 1.5 was really fucking different from the RE2 that we got, which, I mean, Resident Evil 2 is one of the best fucking games I've ever played. Yeah. But the original, to begin with, a lot of the folks that died in that game were supposed to actually assist you and run around with you from start to finish. And I thought that was awesome as fuck. Like, you could have up to like 3 different characters on screen at the same time who weren't zombies. And the amount of zombies that you could have on screen in Resident Evil 1.5 was a lot higher than on the one that we got. They had more diversity amongst like the character models. Like, they had the fat zombies, they had women zombies. They had, like, and the game was much more violent. Like, if you took any damage, it would show on you. If blood splashed on you, it would stay there for quite a while. You got to upgrade your equipment. Like, you could get armor, and you'd be wearing the armor, and it would show on you. You could increase your inventory, which they did carry that over to the original. That would show on you. The entire scenes in the game, they didn't have that gothic architecture like we know with Resident Evil that they're all about. With this, it was more realistic. It was like a modern police station in a modern city. And they had changed so much about it, and they got like 80% complete, and they're like, we're going to redo it. And I was like, fuck, man. The only folks that I know of offhand that got to play it outside of the press was PlayStation Museum. And they were just like, it's fucking amazing. But there has never been a version of it floating around out there. Like, fans tried remaking it from the ground up, and most people were just like, hey, have you played it? I'm like, it's just a fan version. It's not the real thing, so I don't care about it. Yeah. So and should also say this, Claire Redfield didn't fucking exist.
Yeah.
There was no Claire Redfield. That was one of the things that they didn't like about Resident Evil 2. They said, well, there is no connection to the first game. They had Elza Walker. And I still wish that they'd used the character, but Elza Walker was the Claire Redfield. They ended up getting rid of her. They made Claire Redfield so that there was a connection to Chris Redfield from the first game. And, I mean, that game, man, it's such a shame. They had 3.5, which was the original Resident Evil 4. And a completely fucking different game than what we got.
Yeah, definitely. 4, I remember, had a lot of turpitudes during the development process. And it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like they used a lot of the ideas from 1.5 in 4. Yeah. Like the idea of people following you around and so forth, and having more zombies on screen and so forth.
Now, it's weird because... okay, this will actually cover quite a few unreleased things. Resident Evil 3.5 never got turned into anything, but you can see footage of it online. Leon is actually dealing with more paranormal shit, and not so much like manufactured undead. So you've got that. Well, there was going to be a game called Resident Evil Gaiden, and not the Gaiden that we all know on Game Boy Color. This one was supposed to be set in feudal Japan. So that didn't end up happening. That got turned into Onimusha. Well, Onimusha actually started on PlayStation 1. They shit-canned that version of it and moved over to PlayStation 2 because it was so late into the life cycle. So that was 2 unreleased games.
Can't imagine why Capcom suddenly had money problems in the mid-2000s. Can't imagine.
Dude, like all this shit. They had Resident Evil 4, throughout the cycle of that game being developed, one of the versions that they ended up getting rid of was turned into Devil May Cry.
Yeah.
So one of the few exceptions where they took the stuff and made something out of it. And Devil May Cry, Dante was supposed to be part of a special forces unit, and the Dante character was supposed to be like the good guy version of Wesker, which is why he was all super fucking powered and shit. And you can see in the first Devil May Cry, like, a lot of the Resident Evil-esque shit that they have inside of it. And it's just crazy to think like all this stuff was just spin-offs from the RE series. So they made Onimusha and Devil May Cry because of Resident Evil. Yeah, unreleased stuff is awesome. But there's also an unreleased system, the M2. That was one of the
Which
things
was
that we
also
got.
a 64-bit system for this 64 episode of the Hate Bit Podcast. See what we did there? We went all the way back in time and we told Trip Hawkins, you need to make something for our 64th episode. And he said, all right.
Dude, the
True
M2,
story.
The M2 had, dude, their advertisement for that was also pretty fucking ballsy. They were going straight to the throat of Nintendo. I think it's in one of the PC.
For those that don't know, the M2 was going to be the successor to the Panasonic 3DO.
Yes. It was CD-based 64-bit system, which was going to be the successor to the 3DO. When they were advertising this, they had different video packages of Super Mario's his actual hat being melted. And they were just saying, you know, we're going to be the supreme 64-bit system because here's the specs that we have. These fucking obliterate the Nintendo 64. And spec-wise, they did. Assuming somebody could actually work on it, says another. But you can get some of the M2 systems. There's two different versions of it. There's white ones floating around. There's black ones floating around. Lots of jokes can be made there. But they have those. There's a difference between them, though. I don't know, but one of them is a more final version of the system. Don't fucking remember which. But there's a game that came out on Dreamcast called D2. D2 originally started up on the M2. And this all just sounds like weird code. But D2 was a completely different game on the M2. When they canceled it and they redid it, it turned into what you see on Dreamcast. So that
sounds like you're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, honestly, is what.
Actually, it sounds like you're talking about. It sounds like you're talking about the Mighty Ducks and the Terminator.
But dude, there were so many M2 games that some of them ended up making their way into arcade, and some of them ended up getting reworked into different games, and other ones just, I mean, nothing happened with them. But it's interesting because you can still get some of the ROMs or ISOs, whatever you want to call them, and you can burn them and play them on some of the existing M2 systems that are floating around and try them out. I don't know if anybody ever successfully made an emulator out of it. It'd be interesting, though, to reverse engineer an unreleased system to make an emulator to play games that never came out. I mean, weirder things have happened. I mean, there is a
Absolutely, they have.
There's a Tiger Gamecom emulator, so yeah.
This is what you see. What happens when games like Scalebound get canceled? You see what you've done, industry. We're going back.
People have free time, and then they spend their time trying to hack the NES Classic.
Hey, they did it though. I told you they do that shit.
Of course, but someone spent all their fucking time to free those games.
Hey, it looks a lot better than a Raspberry Pi because I mean it's just a fucking board. This at least looks cool.
Fair enough. That was actually released though.
That's that's true. That's true. But yeah, unreleased games. Yeah. Anything else you gents want to add in?
I just want to add in that a lot of games are unreleased because they suck. So, you know.
Star Wars 1313 looked fucking awesome. God damn it. I really wanted that game.
And Velvet Dark apparently was supposed to be a third-person stealth game. It wasn't even going to be a first-person shooter. It was going to be yeah, I mean, we could. Hey, the world always needs more stealth games, as far as I'm concerned. There's never enough.
Oh, by the way, Mr. Fisk,
the world is not enough.
I'm playing Republic right now.
Nice the Old Republic original KOTOR.
No. Republic, the new stealth game. I actually told you about this a while ago.
Oh, Republic.
They call Republic in the game, and that's how I was like, no, it's Republic. I mean, it's Republic, and they're like, no, we're just gonna keep saying Republic. I'm like, you're fucking confusing me, man. Like, what am I doing with my life now? So but they in the game they say Republic, and like I remember like the grip on the controller was tightening a lot. But I haven't gotten super far in the game, but you control.
So wait a minute. So in other words, you were playing the video game like people do in the photos that they use in news reports about video game players.
Except for it wasn't from the intense action; it was from a brain hemorrhage. So that was pretty much my reasoning. But I'm sitting there playing it, and like. You have to move the character around and like hide and shit, and then you're moving. You control like cameras and shit, so you're like controlling two separate entities at the same exact time. So you're doing this shit simultaneously, and you're trying to avoid guards and stuff. So you're hiding behind crates and inside lockers and shit. Then you have to go up and do like codes and shit, and which are their little puzzles. But it's kind of cool, and you're doing like Metroid Prime style scanning all the time. Like every time you hit R1, like you'll see like shit pop up and you can start scanning it, get more information about the world. And I don't know, it's pretty cool. I dig it, especially for a budget title. Dude, it's fucking really good. Really, really good.
No, there's been some pretty good, you know, there was that came out around the same time as another game that was basically like ghetto Russian hitman called Alekhine's Gun. Came out around the same time, and it's pretty good. I played a little bit of it, and I enjoyed it.
I was gonna say, man, I saw that game I saw the game out and about, but never played it. So I was kind of curious.
It's just a janky version of Hitman. So Hitman Abomination, basically. Hitman Absolution, just with no budget, essentially.
That's kind of bad. I'm just glad that we're getting middle market games. I am too,
you know, and a lot of it has to do, thank God for Kickstarter. A lot of it has to do with that. A lot of it has to do with Steam, Project Greenlight, and so forth. We're actually getting it. Like all of the games, I'm looking forward to a lot of games this year. Every single one of them are Kickstarter. Every single one. Battletech, System Shock 3, Underworld Ascendant, the System Shock 1 remake. Every game that I'm looking forward to this year is some Kickstarter game.
I'll just happily throw in Ukulele. Because goddamn, do I need that? Yeah, concerned that we got to talk about platformers, Rare at their apex and shit, and then Ukulele is just the original Rare team coming back and being like, "Hey, so there isn't enough of platforming goodness. We can fill that void." And and they're doing this with like less than half the budget of Mighty Number 9, and it looks a billion times better. Good job, good job. There you go.
How much?
If I can take a dig at that fucking company, I will.
How much money did Mighty Number 9 wind up pissing away? What's the final tally on that?
Concept had lost, I don't know. Here, I'll put it into a better perspective. During Black Friday, their limited edition that came with a statue of Beck was at Best Buy for $10. So, and I still passed on it, mainly because they still haven't even sent me my actual copy of the game. So, but I got the DLC codes for it. Thanks.
I think that calls for us to just pause for a moment and have a synchronized evil laugh in unison.
On the count of 3.
3, 2, 1.
I was going to go.
I do think it's interesting, though. It has adopted a nickname recently. I heard a good one, Mighty Number 2.
it kind of, well, considering that I saw it on sale for $9, it amused me more. Mighty Number $9 and still ain't selling.
You can always tell. It's interesting how, you know, they set up entire video game websites for to gauge the success of a game. Oh, we got VG charts over here, which has notoriously spotty numbers, whatever. But at the end of the day, all you have to do is look at the price. A good example of this is if Skyrim still goes for like $40 5 years later, right?
Dude, Grand Theft Auto 5 still can sell at damn near full retail, and they're just like, well, we are one of the best-selling games of all time. Fuck it. They just keep it out there.
No, No shit. I actually have a picture somewhere. I can't believe I haven't put it on Twitter yet. But I took the picture like 3 months after they dropped, and it was the Phantom Pain and Until Dawn and Mad Max sitting side by side on a shelf at GameStop. Mad Max was still like $50. The Phantom Pain was down to like 30, and Until Dawn was like 15. It was like within 3 or 4 months of the fucking game dropping, and they had already dropped that much. But it was a good example. Mad Max was great. Phantom Pain was a piece of shit, and Until Dawn was it was a gift to hacky Let's Players. That's what Until Dawn was.
What do you mean? I mean, come on now. Just because they're just gonna have all the feigned over-the-top expressions of fear. I mean, that's a genuine article. They're not just fucking hamming it up for the camera or anything.
Yeah. You mean PewDiePie doesn't shriek like a lady in real life?
No, I think that he might. Depends on like if he drops a gold brick on his toe. So that's definitely possible.
It's definitely possible. Definitely possible.
Dude.
Okay, well that's it. Finally, you fuckers are talking about PewDiePie. That means we got to get out of here. We thank you very much for joining our program. It's been a wild time because PewDiePie and fucking shit and consoles that never came out with games that never came out. You know you had a great time. Come back and see us next time. I am in the intrepid Yell Chaos. This has been the Hate Bit Podcast. Don't forget to check us out on the Facebook, on the Twitter, on the Instagram. Drop us a line if you feel like it at hatebitpodcast@gmail.com. Joining me has been the man from Pennsylvania, Alpha Omegason.
It's Transylvania. I'm a nocturnal creature. I discussed this with you earlier. I am a night walker. I wage war against the day walkers. Yeah, that's all.
Fabulous. Not a cry for attention or anything. And also, the prettiest man in Dodge. Raise your fist.
In Dodge? Yeah.
Okay, Tombstone, whatever.
Just to add on to what Alpha said, if PewDiePie is screaming out, it means either he dropped a gold brick on his toe, or Google decided to wear the ribbed rubber that week. I'm Razor Fist got fucking speed.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Dear God, help me!